don't normally grow all that well in northern Ontario, but this one certainly seemed to be flourishing. Police executing a search warrant near Timmins found 18,000 marijuana plants growing in perfectly straight rows. It is one of the biggest grow-off busts in Canadian history, with police estimating the pot's value at more than $20 million. The U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration says grow-offs across Canada and in all 50 states have been fueled by marijuana seeds from a Vancouver dealer. Marc Emery is his name, and he faces serious trafficking charges in the United States where he could get a life sentence if he's extradited. Emery fully admits to selling seeds over the internet, but he claims he didn't keep the $5 million the DEA says he profited. So where did all the money go? Global National's Giesz-Ramsay has the surprising answer, one that stretches all the way to Parliament Hill.
The Prince of Pot returned to his court today. Fresh from being released from prison, Marc Emery visited his marijuana seed shop. Emery has become such a symbol among the pot set, he's even signing T-shirts. While his store does sell magazines and hemp clothing, the vast majority of his wealth comes from internet seed sales, totaling $5 million.
But as a person like me, who keeps nothing, I clearly have benefited personally less than many, many other people who sell seeds, who keep all this money and buy goods and assets and store money offshore.
The DEA alleges the $5 million are proceeds of crime. Emery sat down with Global National to crunch some of the numbers. He says half the money went to pay seed wholesalers for stock. Then he paid himself a salary up to $350,000 a year, which was taxed. The remaining dollars, he says, went to fund marijuana legalization efforts around the world, court costs for activists, and ballot initiatives in the U.S. His goal, he says, was to bring a business plan to pot culture.
My manifesto has been clear that I developed a retail revolution so that we could earn lots of money to fund a peaceful revolution that would change the way the world thinks about marijuana.
I would legalize this, and I would tax the living hell out of it.
Those dollars Emery fund this marijuana conference, which included Vancouver's mayor, Larry Campbell, cost $34,000. It's his political involvement, he believes, that's led to the U.S. laying charges. In fact, Emery donated $9,400 to the NDP with his marijuana seed kingdom. In fact, NDP leader Jack Layton appeared on Emery's Pot TV, calling marijuana a wonderful substance.
As you can see, they must be frightened to death that people like Jack Layton would come to my home and ask for my support. Not me asking for their support, but they coming to my home and asking my support. That people on city council, that mayors of cities will come to my conferences and make their pronouncements. This frightens the United States. They see that this person is having an influence. It's not about marijuana.
Besides his salary, Emery says all the money went to pay for activism. He kept none of it. He may wished he had. With extradition, he faces hefty legal bills. In Vancouver, this is Global's Giesz-Ramsay reporting.
The Prince of Pot is out of jail, having posted $50,000 in bail money. Marc Emery, the leader of the BC Marijuana Party, was arrested last week in Halifax at the request of American authorities. If extradited and convicted, he could face 10 years in jail.
A week in the slammer hasn't softened the Prince of Pot's resolve. Out on bail, the Americans want him back behind bars in their country. But Marc Emery, on the left with the manager of the BC Marijuana Party, seems to have spent his time in solitude wisely, already formulating some key points in his extradition defense, including Ottawa's apparent complicity in his marijuana seed operation.
The government of Canada knew I was selling marijuana seeds. The Income Tax Department, the Canadian Revenue Agency, gladly took $380,000 from me in personal income taxes over the last 5 years, and they knew that this was from the sale of marijuana seeds. They were anxious to get this money. They were glad to get it. They knew it came from marijuana seeds. They said that didn't concern them. They welcomed the money.
Emery says it was his high-profile, in-your-face approach to marijuana activism and the sale of seeds to the U.S. that made him a target for the DEA. It's alleged he sold seeds to undercover American police. They asked for a warrant, and Vancouver police raided his seed store last Friday, arresting some protesters. Emery was arrested in Halifax and brought back to Vancouver. In court Tuesday, the lawyer for the American authorities opposing his bail claimed over $5 million passed through Emery's two business accounts.
I never aggrandized myself. I didn't use this money. I never travel. I don't own anything. I own no cars, stocks, bonds, offshore money. I don't own homes. I have no personal property of any kind. I've never kept any of this money ever, and I will be able to show you that I have given millions and millions away to worthy causes, causes that oftentimes involved leaders of political parties.
The condition of your bail, you can't sell seeds anymore, and what happens to the movement if you can't raise money?
The movement will have to learn to cope without my generosity and largesse, and I hope the movement will now offer to compensate me with kindness and financial donations from my legal counsel, because I have done nothing but put out my entire adult life for people in need and distress, and I hope they respond in kind to me now when I am clearly in distress.
Canadian police arrested Emery for the DEA. The question now, will our courts extradite him to the U.S., where he could face a minimum 10 years in jail? Emery says he's prepared to be a marijuana martyr, but the prospect of going to an American prison frightens him. His extradition hearing begins in 3 weeks.
For supporters of Marc Emery, it's become an issue of Canadian sovereignty and a battle to protect the so-called Prince of Pot from being extradited to the U.S. for selling marijuana seeds over the Internet. But to U.S. officials fighting the war on drugs, Marc Emery is a criminal who is a danger to America.
In the growing of thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of marijuana plants in America, thus involved in the allegedly in the illegal distribution of marijuana in this country. He is a drug dealer.
For the past decade, Marc Emery has been publicly flaunting his disregard for marijuana laws and working to legalize the drug that many regard as a benign substance.
I think he is sincerely trying to change what he considers to be a foolish and counterproductive law, and he has engaged in civil disobedience to do that, and he's taken his lumps.
Those lumps could be a lot harder to bear now that American officials want to prosecute Marc Emery. And history has shown that when the U.S. wants to extradite someone from Canada, they usually get their way. Few would argue with the extradition of young killers Atif Rafe and Sebastian Burns, nor even Playboy fraud artist Christopher Rocancourt, who scammed over $1 million from wealthy Americans.
I don't know exactly what will happen when we go back there.
But consider the relentless pursuit of Alan Richardson, the unassuming West Vancouver man and Triumph researcher, ordered back to the States to serve the rest of his time for a $20 drug sale 30 years after the offense.
Well, this is a good example of the complete lack of perspective in these things. I mean, what is the harm being done? I mean, if Americans want to say marijuana is a bad thing, that's fine, but they're treading on thin ice.
But treading with massive political clout and with no hesitation to use it against Canadian citizens like Marc Emery.
90% of his seed business comes from down south. He knows that, and he knows how draconian their rules are. Yet he continued to sell seeds down there anyways. He rolled the dice and he lost.
I think they should stay in their own country. This is Canada. That's the United States. Keep your own laws down there.
I don't agree with what he's done, but if he hasn't broken a law in this country, I think it's kind of scary if we start extraditing people that aren't guilty of a crime here, but are guilty elsewhere.
Marc Emery may have scores of supporters on this side of the border, but he also has a lot of opponents, and it's yet to be played out whether Emery's politics will be a match for the war on drugs.
And they're willing to pursue something that's costing billions of dollars, getting them nothing in return, making them the laughingstock of the rest of the world, and they just will not take the evidence the rest of the world has looked at and said, we shouldn't do this.
Welcome back to the Noon News Hour. We have Marc Emery with us. You are not the self-professed Prince of Pot. That is a name you say the media has actually given to you, American media, CNN and whatnot.
That's right.
So the media dubbed Prince of Pot is here, and this has been certainly making news headlines across Canada and the States. The last couple of weeks have been certainly exciting, interesting, not dull for you. Released from jail just yesterday, in fact, on $50,000 bail. Arrested in Halifax last week at the request of the U.S. authorities, and alleged charges including conspiring to manufacture marijuana, distribute marijuana, and launder money, and now an extradition hearing into the States in a couple of weeks' time. And and some pretty serious stuff. I mean, a minimum charge there of 10 years behind bars. Mark,
well, let's not
let's talk about
They want me to be in prison for the rest of my life.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not disturbing so much because ultimately, you know, when I arrived in Vancouver 11 years ago, penniless, with a determination to put together a revolutionary marijuana legalization movement, and I sold books and magazines door to door on the very streets of Vancouver for 4 months, making $1 or $2 per book and magazine. They were banned in those days before we, in fact, with the brilliant legal work of Alan Young, we overturned that ban, and Canada was free to read about marijuana and look at things about marijuana. And so all along in my life, all the money I've ever earned, as I've told people, I own no stocks, bonds, money, homes, property. I have never owned possessions.
Where's the money? Where does it go?
I give it away, and I'll be producing a list in the days ahead of the millions and millions of dollars I have given to every major organization worldwide, and hundreds of people who themselves were in jail and needed lawyers, bail money.
Millions of dollars.
Millions of dollars.
Given away.
Absolutely.
You say political parties also. Do you mean your own, the marijuana party, or do you mean other parties?
I gave extensive amounts of money to the BC Marijuana Party, Manitoba Marijuana, Saskatchewan Marijuana Party, marijuana parties throughout the world. Even in Israel, the Greenleaf Party, we gave them $2,000 a couple of years ago. We've given money to Dennis Kucinich for president campaign. The NDP received thousands of dollars in the last election. I've spent endless amounts of money putting democratic change for human rights in the forefront. And every cent I've ever earned has gone to that. I even spent $250,000 of my money from 2002 to 2004 on a fabulous drug addiction program that I personally administered here in the city called the Iboga Therapy House, where we treated hardcore heroin, crack, cocaine, and methamphetamine users to great success.
Let's move away from the money aspect just for a second here. Were you totally blindsided in Halifax when our CMP, again acting on the U.S. authorities' request, arrested you last week? Did that come out of nowhere for you?
No, all my life I've been fated for this unique destiny. I felt very, very motivated to this end since I was very, very young. I've always been very gifted with money at a very early age, like age 7. I had my first business, and age 11 I had my first successful business that went on to produce revenue. And I've been being trained my whole life to earn money, to give money away, and to have the ultimate confrontation with the oppressive authorities. The United States government is an evil government. They have a gulag of hundreds of thousands of people in jail for 5, 10, 15, 20 years of life for nonviolent drug offenses.
They take exception to you selling marijuana seeds to American citizens online.
Yes,
they've come after you for that.
They're wrong. Marijuana, the Supreme Court of Canada, which I also paid for that case, by the way, $85,000 of my money went to that, and everything you can ever think of, I had a hand in paying for in the last 10 years. That's why the movement, the revolutionary movement to end prohibition has been so successful, is because it's had a funder like myself, and it did others like George Soros. But my point I wanted to make was that it's all about what I have been able to do to change the way the public thinks of things. And remember, it's relatively rare, but still very Canadian, for people to use just democratic ideals for change. Most people today are using bombs or wars or invasions or terrorism to try and accomplish things because democracy has frustrated the poor and working classes of the world.
More than democracy, though, I think your issue is putting the idea of Canadian sovereignty into the spotlight. People are saying, why should the Americans be allowed to come up here and go after someone like Emery in terms of extradition? Others, mind you, are saying, let the Americans do what the Canadians have not done for so long and
well, first of all,
send them off.
No one ever complained in Canada about my work in 70. See, if anyone had complained
You're
about
saying, in fact, the government knew what you were doing.
Everyone
they were
knew.
happy to take your taxpayer dollars.
The city, the mayor of Vancouver, to the city council of Vancouver, to the licensing bureau of Vancouver, to the provincial and federal government that received so much money from me, knowing that that money was directly from marijuana. No one in the public even complained to the police, so they would have raided me before. The reason the police let the Americans do all this is because they realized they could get rid of a problem all at once. Remember, the police...
by letting the Americans come and do the dirty work?
Yes, that's right, because remember, the police are the biggest lobbyists in favor of prohibition. Whenever you find someone who wants to keep marijuana illegal, it's always either Randy White or a police representative. So now, by eliminating me in one fell swoop, the Americans, the Canadian police establishment, the prohibitionist forces have wiped out the worldwide leader. Let's face it, I'm the recognized worldwide leader of this movement that profoundly affects 150 million.
And that's why you say you've been targeted, because you're high profile.
There's hundreds of other seed sellers who have been selling seeds for years and years. They keep every penny of it for themselves and live wonderful, ostentatious lives. I have given away every dime I ever earned, and this has been going on for 25 years. But people in my hometown, London, Ontario, will tell you that I was going to jail and fighting causes every day of my life there before I even came to British Columbia.
Quickly, Mark, what's next now? Obviously, you're, this extradition hearing in a couple of weeks. you have to be a little bit concerned, scared? What are you feeling? You say you'll go to jail for this. You'll be a marijuana martyr.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That could perhaps be the greatest honor I could ever have asked for. No, I don't want to do that. I want people to get together and galvanize this movement around the world and rally behind me, not so much to save me, but to be aware that there are hundreds of thousands. You know, there's 250,000 people in jail at any one time around the world for marijuana. A beautiful God-given plant that God bequeathed to his children here on earth that doesn't hurt anybody. The Canadian Supreme Court, as I was going to mention before, said that marijuana is of no inherent harm, but they still maintain the government's right to regulate and control it. So I'm talking about an oppressed class of people, of millions of people, that were being saved and being represented by the use of my money, and I was being an instrument and a tool for this great revolution, and I felt that this is my unique destiny, and this is what I have to accept.
Marc, it's always interesting to have you here, always a little bit controversial. Some will agree, some won't, but we do thank you for your time. We do appreciate you being here.
I thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks very much. Jay is standing by with a full look at sports for you and your province entertainment.